Well, that's a wonderful or awesome presentation by Marcus of the reasons why the moon visit didn't make sense, why it couldn't have gone. I can't answer any of those points. We're all in a state, I would say, of cognitive dissonance on this, but we've got bits that don't make sense. And for a brief few years, 1968, 72, human beings apparently went out through the Van Allen belt. That's the radiation bands around the Earth. And never before and never since has anyone done it. And the more years that go by, when no one else has done it, the more people are going to believe that it never happened. A survey a couple of years ago showed that over 50% of the British people did not believe moon landings had ever happened, whereas about 2012, Telegraph showed about 25% believed it didn't happen. It's very much in the younger generation, especially. So that fraction is going up. I remember when Marcus was originally presenting his stuff, hardly anyone took his view, and now it's much more becoming accepted. So I feel like a sort of reactionary old fogey. Perhaps let me start this book, The Moon Landings. I was at the book launch. This is just a British science journalist who was at an astronomy conference, and after he went round each year to the astronauts, Houston, and talked to them, got to know them all, and he grippingly described each stage of the space adventure. And at the end of the book launch, he spontaneously started talking to me, saying how stressful it was. People kept on coming up to him saying, of course, they didn't really go there, did they? And he said, well, I would have noticed something. They were ordinary guys, these, if they hadn't really gone. So he was with them with the enthusiasm, initiative, and daring of going out to the moon. And if they're really fiddling it all, he said, I would have noticed. I'm here advocating something like this Hoagland thesis, dark mission, that NASA is a military organisation on a military contracts, and the astronauts were strongly programmed. They were physics guys, they were military guys, they were aviation guys. They were programmed what they're allowed to say and what they weren't allowed to say. I think they were stressed out because there were a lot of UFO type activity they came across going out to the moon and also on the moon, and remains of possible alien civilizations they found there, and they were just told, you're not allowed to talk about it, don't talk about it. What did anyone see around the back of the moon? Don't talk about it. And I think that caused a lot of stress in them, and that's partly the reason why they were rather non-communicative. By any standards, those astronauts were amazingly non-communicative, amazingly unable to convey the expression that what did it feel like to be in space, so everyone asked them. And they basically couldn't tell you anything. They would give, it would be okay with sort of factual type arguments. Here is the great difficulty in believing that it all happened. Suddenly, in December 1968, they go right out to the moon and circle the moon. You might have thought, well, surely they send a monkey into space or something first, check it out. From Earth orbit, they go straight into going right out to the moon, and the answer you'll get is, well, they were short of time. President Kennedy had given them a decade, and they had to get on with it. So those are the steps they go through. For example, Apollo 10, they descend to within 10 miles of the lunar surface, and then the question we're addressing today, did Apollo 11 really happen when they landed on the moon? I was personally convinced by this account of a big radio telescope down under. As the Earth revolved, various radio telescopes had the job of tracking the lunar Apollo astronauts. They went out to the moon, and there were three main centres around the Earth which revolved every day, so that they would keep continuously in touch with the astronauts, and also radio enthusiasts were able to pick up on their messages. Okay, so it was the main, these three main groups of radio telescopes followed the Apollo astronauts out to the moon and back again, but also there were various radio hams able to do it. This Australian one had the, it's an account, I would say, of ordinary blokes, ordinary people suddenly coming up to the big moment in their life And as Aldrin and Armstrong were landed on the moon, they did. They were supposed to have a nap then, wait 6 hours, and then get out. And they found they weren't able to do that. They wanted to get out right away, and that had the effect down under here that the moon was rather low on the horizon, and they had to stretch their radio telescope, that's it, right over, and there was a very high howling gale, so it was a very dangerous situation they were in. If you remember, the original pictures of getting out of lunar surface were quite blurred and low resolution. That's because this radio telescope down under had to bend itself right over and was much lower on the horizon than it should have been. This is the experience of these guys when it first happened. Bloody hell, they're a man on the moon. They get heart monitors of the astronauts, and in fact, and that was a load of ordinary blokes, and that was the big moment in their life. In my experience of astronomers, I would say astronomers are not much good at communicating with the public, but they're not into deception. They don't have skills of deception, I would say. So there's quite a large number of astronomers involved in this whole Apollo project. You have to decide if you want to believe what they said. I'm sorry, I lost the words here. An hour or so, the second words Neil Armstrong speaks on stepping onto the moon, it's not about his feelings. These people are trained not to talk about what it felt like. There's a technical account of how crunchy the ground was, the dust particles, and how they stuck to the side of his boots. That was his, as it were, his first major statement when he was on the moon. People criticise his interviews that he didn't come across genuinely, or he used the passive tense. It was this, it was that. He didn't talk about his feelings. Well, these guys are trained to be that way. They are very unemotional, otherwise they could never handle the stress. Why did Armstrong become very much of a hermit for years? Well, that's a very good question. To start with, he was Mr. Apollo Moon, and he went around doing tours. Then he crashed out, became a hermit. He had a physics lecturing job, but he wouldn't talk to anyone at all. Okay, and let's say why I think that was. It was shattering for him to realise after Apollo 17 that there was no follow through on the lunar programme. Initially, if you see his interview with Patrick Moore, he said, "I am certain that what we've done now is a beginning, and it will be followed through with lunar bases by the end of this century." And he said he was certain that, Patrick Moore. Then he had to realise that it wasn't so. That what was the point of the whole thing? The point of the whole thing was him and a few other astronauts going to the moon as part of American propaganda. There was no big follow-through of the dawn of a space age. That was, if you can remember, that was the great hope, and that's what Neil Armstrong thought the whole thing was about, some new space age dawning. And it was shattering for him to realise, no, it wasn't so, that is it, and we just want you to walk around and say how great America is, and that's all. Anyway, here's the highly controversial picture, Aldrin photographed by Armstrong, and I would suggest, at one point I'm slightly disagreeing with Marcus, that the lunar surface has glass spherules on it. It's very much composed of round glass spherules that have unusual refractive properties, very different from soil on Earth. That's why the full moon can get so very bright and has unusual refractive and reflective properties. Okay, that's why you get that bright spot just behind him. It's the way the kind of glassy spherical surface is reflecting the sunlight. Okay, here you have early selfie. You see Neil Armstrong in the head, in the visor. He's taking the picture, and so you see the reflection of it. Okay. Some people have felt this is contraption here, very unlikely looking design. Well, I sort of agree with that. One astronaut, Apollo 12, Alan Bean, he became an artist afterwards. The moon is a grey, colourless world. Imagine you're landing on a world that is soundless, colourless, lifeless, and no wind. And maybe that is so very alien, perhaps that's why some of the astronauts couldn't remember or describe much about it. But he has described it, and he has put in some bits of colour. That's the first painting of a man on another world. Here is him saying how he wanted to just spend his time doing paintings. That's him experiencing the vast loneliness of space on the moon. Okay, the fourth man to walk on the moon, Alan B. So I suggest that's a genuine life experience. He dedicated his life to doing paintings of his Apollo experience. This markers very well searing logic. The whole damn thing is much too bright in the posterior. I have two comments on that. Firstly, what I just said about the lunar surface, unusual reflective properties. Secondly, when we get to the Chang launch landing, the Chinese lander, you'll see some similar behaviour. As an unmanned probe on the moon recently. And then the glorious vision of Earth above the lunar surface. I suggest that's a genuine picture, okay? And the issue at stake here, very much I think, is does man have an interplanetary future? Is there an interplanetary future for mankind? Well, I hope the answer is yes. I think it's very important for the human species that we do venture out to space, and when we do that, we will discover that both Mars and the Moon have evidence of some sort of old, earlier intelligent life or bygone civilizations, and I feel that's a very important part of our future. And I do say NASA has betrayed its mission to seek for evidence of alien life. I think that perhaps we shouldn't criticise them too much doing this thing in the glare of publicity, but a lot of people don't believe anything that American officials say anymore now, so that is a major problem, isn't it? Okay, here's another one with the problem of shadows and lighting. And I'll say on an alien world, things don't look quite as you expect they might have done. Are the shadows all the wrong way? Well, I would say that's a parallax or a perspective effect, and if they were going to fake it all, they would get all the shadows going the same way, wouldn't they? So, it does look strange having these shadows in different directions, but that might be an effect of where the camera is positioned and so forth. And you do get that effect on Earth of shadows in different directions. Okay, this is a very pungent statement by a filmmaker. He's saying, he admits American officials lie to you every day, and he says the younger you are, the more you're going to believe that virtual reality can mock up just about anything. Okay, and he says, remember, back in the swinging 60s, they may have just about had the ability to go to the moon, but they did not have the ability to fake it. He says, I'm no expert on this, but I'm just quoting him, he's a filmmaker. He says, did they fake going to the moon? I'm pretty sure they didn't because they couldn't. They were, in fact, the opposite is true. By the late 1960s, they had the technical ability, they did not have the technology to fake it on video. Obviously, we could all discuss this. I'm sure you guys know a lot more about this than I do, but let's just remember how rudimentary it was way back in the 60s. Okay? Okay, that's a picture. This foreground is the height of a 4-storey house, huge rocks there, and an astronaut going back to his moon buggy there, Apollo 17. Here's a guy jumping. A lot of people said, well, why didn't they show there's more low G? It's only supposed to be 1/6 the Earth gravity, and is this really the best they can do? Well, okay, that is the best they could do. Are you convinced? I mean, I totally agree with everything Marcus said about how much too good the photographs are, and I can't comment except rather feeble remark that just because they fake some of the photographs doesn't mean they didn't go to the moon, which is not very convincing, but that's the best I can do. Okay, since the Apollo missions, astronomers have the ability to tell the moon's distance within about a centimetre or two, and they can tell that slowly the moon is moving away from the Earth, measure it on these laser reflectometers. These were put there by the Apollo missions. Now, if you want to take the Percy view, this is that they didn't go there, the fake whole thing, which Mark has just given us. They say, oh, well, maybe robots went there and put them. Well, my impression is that I would say those footprints around the laser thing are real, and it needed human beings to put those down there and adjust them so that they work properly and reflected light back to Earth.
But the moon's surface is very reflective, as you can see by its brightness of it.
Yeah.
Can't it reflect light off the moon by itself?
No. A laser, these things have very precise 90-degree angles within them. And that means that any light coming down will reflect back exactly the same direction.
Yeah, just one question on that, Nick. You do know that MIT were doing lasers launched off the moon in 1962.
No, it's true.
And that a laser does not maintain its integrity all the way to the moon, it spreads out. When it reaches the moon, it has a diameter of 2 kilometers.
Okay, thanks, Marcus.
What percentage is reflected by
thanks for that devastating comment, Marcus. Because a laser was used in 1962, well, I mean, maybe it was, but I don't know the answer, but I would suggest that it was better with these. Mainly, one hears about lasers working since then. But I totally accept Marcus's criticism here. Yeah. Okay? Okay, so now, this is, there are a couple of pictures, if you believe it, of the moon, the spaceship having blasted off the moon and is now coming towards the third astronaut. One astronaut was orbiting around the moon all the time. 2 of them landed on the moon and then came off again. And they now have the difficult moment of linking up. That is coming towards the person photographing it, and they've got to link up before going back to Earth. Okay? Let me just say that the person going around the moon in the orbit, did experience masses of stars on the dark side of the moon. Okay, people say, why don't you see any stars in any NASA photographs on the moon? Well, you don't, for exactly the same reason that you don't see stars in the daytime here on Earth. There's too much refraction of light off the surface of the moon to see the stars, as I think Marcus accepted. And also going home, they saw about 10 times more stars through the portals of their return vehicles, absolute massive stars you saw going home. Okay, so I think these are wonderful pictures, and I suggest this is something that did really happen. Okay, it's coming back now, and yep, they've done it. Buzz Aldrin, come back to the human question, what do you feel like? Buzz Aldrin, well known, kind of emotional crisis he had. He was, be sitting there taking questions, and he's always all his life programmed to carry out exact operations and answer technical questions. And he's asked a question about his own feelings, and he just couldn't contact them. In fact, he tried to visit a psychiatrist to have treatment to remember his feelings on the moon. Okay, so what happened? Why couldn't he remember them? So this is Richard Hoagland's view. I think he's quite a knowledgeable chap, Hoagland. What do you think? And he said NASA insider told him during the debriefings the Apollo astronauts were hypnotised. It seems more like these were sessions we used to make them forget what they're seeing. Anyway, that's his view. And I think we all have a kind of problem when you look at the astronauts back home. They're not in a hurry to communicate. They can talk to fellow scientists, all right, but in general, they don't communicate what it felt like. And I mean, there's all sorts of questions we'd like to ask them, aren't there? What about the flags fluttering? Was the flag fluttering? I mean, I would say in a vacuum, a flag will flutter much more than it does on Earth. It won't stop. Nothing to stop it fluttering. But these are all questions. And what about the stars? Did you see any? That picture's very fishy. Can you comment on it? And we'd expect the astronauts to want to be on TV chat programs to talk about it, wouldn't we? Just communicate with us. The greatest adventure ever in history, and they seem threatened, and they're not able to communicate. So I suggest that is a basic primal phenomenon of this whole story, and that's what's led to the belief that they never went. Okay, here is Buzz Aldrin in his old age, and he's campaigning to go to Mars. Okay, would he really be doing that if he hadn't gone to the moon? If he faked the whole thing? Yeah?
I'll say yeah, I think you might.
And why would he do that, Tom?
Because it's fake. Sorry.
Anyone else want to comment?
Yeah, it consolidates the story that he went to the moon.
It consolidates. Okay, let's leave it at that then. Okay, it's often said these guys look very miserable, which often looks a bit sort of suspicious, but here they're looking quite pleased with everything. Okay, now back in 2009, I think it was, the LRO, Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, was about 50 miles above the lunar surface, took photographs that could identify the old Apollo sites, and it could tell the difference between the dual-track moon buggy and single boot print. But then, 2012, they redid it quite dangerously, elliptical orbit, so that it was only about 10 miles above the moon at the Apollo sites, right? And so they got it much closer up. And here, that they were able to show quite good pictures of the tracks. Now, obviously, a lot of people are going to say, well, fake the moon landings, they can fake that, can't they? So you have to think, how much do you want to believe that they're faked, if you think that. Here's another one, Apollo 15, which apparently shows boot prints. And if you see the arrows there, I don't know if you can see it, that is the dual track of the moon buggy. Can you just about see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's another one. Now, what happened with Apollo 17? As the craft was taking off from the moon, it photographed the lunar surface, and this then was then enhanced. Somebody realised, hang on, this should be comparable to the pictures which much later on was taken by the LRO. So you can see they're basically identical. Also, if you want proof they actually went to the moon, here you're looking at the proof. Okay, that is the historic pictures by Apollo 17 of the lunar surface, and that is many years later, 40 years later, the LRO showing it's still there. Those are the same. That is the same ground showing the lunar rover and the boot prints. Okay. Now, one LRO scientist commented on the way the flags of each of the Apollo landing sites are still there, except for one which got knocked over. I think Apollo 11, they said the flag was knocked over when they left. So they reckon they can see shadows or signs of all of the flags, and different times of day, lunar days, 27 Earth days, you can watch the shadow circle around the flag. So that is a sign that the flag is really there, and that makes sense to me, okay? So I hate to say it, really hurts me to say it, that American flags are there on the moon, but I'm afraid that's what the pictures show.
Yeah, they're probably enjoying the July the 4th today.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now, people say the Apollo 17 blast-off, sorry, I'm not clever enough to get a moving video for you, but I think the Apollo 17 blast-off does show the flame of the blast-off, which earlier ones didn't. And this was the only one where they got a proper photograph of it. If you see that moon buggy there, up there, that is the camera that photographed this as they took off, and the camera is remotely controlled from Earth, so the camera tilted up as it took off. That's how they got a moving picture of that Apollo 17 blast-off. So that's quite an achievement. Yes, Simon?
Can I just ask, Nick, if it's remotely controlled on Earth, what technology are they using? Radio technology, presumably. I mean, if so, what's the delay? You're 250,000 miles.
It's a few seconds, isn't it? Matt, what would you say?
It must be significant.
Well, they figured it out before.
Yeah, perhaps they just a bit weak to it. I'm sorry, I'm not being deliberately argumentative.
I'm not much of a techie here, but I think it was, so you probably know a lot better than
I know there must be some delay, 250,000 miles.
Well, yeah, but you'd have to factor that in.
Yeah, whatever.
Okay, here's the Apollo crew, the crew back home that are managing it all, and they're amazingly young. I heard the story that when Kennedy first told them to go to the moon, they asked all the top astronomy experts, and they said, no, it can't be done. So they got a much younger crew that didn't realise it was impossible. Okay, so a lot of these are in their 20s, aren't they? So it's a young crew, and I suggest they're not. These are not skilled in any art of deception. Here is the big moment. Again, these are people who have achieved something. It's the big moment of the whole life, and it's worked. They've done it. Is that Werner von Braun in the middle? Yeah, I think it is. My personal opinion, people ask me why could America go to the moon then? They can't do it now. They had the top German science and technology experts in the world. German science and technology was the best in the world, probably still is, and that's why they could do it now. Americans by themselves, just a personal opinion, do not have the mental focus to build these rockets and make them work. Okay? By themselves, they can't even do a space shuttle, can they? They have Russian rockets now, taking up to the space shuttle. If Americans want to do it, they've got to collaborate with, I would say, the Russians or Germans to get it to work. Okay, here is the master genius behind it, Werner von Braun. They were rather covered up that the NASA director was essentially a German program developed by hundreds of German aerospace scientists and engineers. So I would personally say that was the key to why it worked, right? Which seems rather awesome to us now. I mean, we just hardly believe that anyone could do this old damn thing. Figure it all out, get them there, get them to come back. I mean, how the hell? I totally understand astronomers now saying that they can't do it. Anyway, I said the astronauts are remarkably incoherent. There was a funny comment Neil Armstrong made his 25th anniversary speech to the White House. He said, made a joke, he said that the parrot is the only bird that could talk, and he couldn't fly very well. And I think he's talking about the way you're aware how incoherent they all were. Well, one exception is Edgar Mitchell, who founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences when he got back to Earth, and he wrote this great American classic, The Way of the Explorer, which is a spiritual and physical adventure. And here is the one kind of poetic, vivid account of what it felt like to be on the moon, right? I felt we're suddenly native to this land, stillness in the conveyed landscape, and patiently waiting around millions of years. Sunlight, unreal clarity, a stunningly foreign, beautiful world, the sheer eeriness of the view, the shapes and starkness of the sun-drenched landscape are more dramatic than similar forms of Earth. So it goes on like this about what it was like, and then his big moment came on the way back. He was on this on the way back in barbecue mode. It rotates so that the sun doesn't heat up too much on any one side. Okay, so he sees the moon and the sun and the Earth and all the stars rotating around him, and it just blew his mind. Okay, there was this moment of transformed consciousness when he felt at one with everything, so that is part of his account of it, of the greatness of the achievement. I suggest that the swing sixes, which is time everyone looks back to, this really was a great achievement, and Edgar Mitchell is really telling you of what he went through. Okay? Okay. Here are a couple of testimonies. Are we okay for time? Here are a couple of testimonies from Indian and Chinese lunar missions. Sure. Sorry about this. Anyway, Chandrayaan mission 2009 and China's 2010 Chang'e mission both claim to have photographed remains of the Apollo sites. Here is, you can go to third-party evidence for lunar landings on Wikipedia for this. Okay? Here is an official bulletin put out by Chinese government, and it says, scientists trace the previous Apollo missions and the images said UN chief scientists. Now, these are not friends of America. I mean, China would love to be able to say, no, nothing there, you know, sorry, it was all fake. The Chinese would love to be able to say that, wouldn't they? But they didn't, okay?
Not anymore.
Oh, okay.
They're more friendly, aren't they?
Okay. Here is the their account how Chang landed on the moon, Rabbit. There were two of them. The Rabbit craft could travel away, and they could both photograph each other. Okay, first of all, we noticed the pictures of the lunar surface are remarkably similar to what Apollo found. With, for example, the amount of dust on the surface, inch or two of dust, and what happened, what the tracks look like. It's basically the same kind of thing that Apollo found. Okay, the way in which they designed the lander craft was remarkably similar to the Apollo, and people also said, well, hang on, where is the blast crater? That was all the dust blown away. Likewise, you can't see that. So it's because they came in at a very near horizontal angle to land slowly. So perhaps where they just landed, the dust wasn't displaced too much. I mean, that's all I can say. But this Chang landing craft did not show any great crater or blowing away of dust. Okay. Likewise, no stars are visible in the Chang photos for the reasons we've discussed, just as with the Apollo mission. So I would say there's a lot in common with the way they chose to do all that, and in what is supposed to be the dark side of the craft, away from the sun, it looks suspiciously lit up. This is just the same thing that people found suspicious with Apollo, isn't it? And I would say that it's the unusual behaviour of the dust on the lunar surface, which is not Earth dust. It's small spherical granules, glassy granules that has reflective properties. That's the best I can do. Okay, but this is an important comparison with Apollo. The landing procedure was very similar: deceleration, coming in horizontally. Okay, a special feature of moon rock was how much older it was than Earth rock. 1 or 2 billion years older, if you remember. They talked about Genesis rock, and it was lead isotopes. That's the most characteristic feature of moon rock. These lead isotopes that lead decays. Scientists measure old age, millions, billions of years, by lead isotopes, lead-uranium ratio, for example, and the isotopes in the moon rock indicated extreme old age. Also, the iron was the moon rock. We've got it. Moon. Ha! Fantastic. Marcus, where did you get this from?
What's that?
Moon rock.
Moon rock.
Yeah.
Well, it came from the moon, obviously.
Came from the moon, obviously. Thank you. Right. Yeah. The moon rock was a kind of special purity. It's lacking no water in it, no organic compounds in it, very short sodium and potassium.
Notice the little pits in it.
Little bit.
Little pips.
Little bits. Oh, okay.
Created by micrometeorites.
So there's no organic matter in this, obviously, but the iron is amazingly pure, and there's more of it. There's up to 15% iron in moon rock. There was only 5% on Earth, and there's much less nickel in it. Nickel is it tells you a lot about where iron came from. It's 100 to 1 on Earth, 21 roughly on meteorites, 20,000 to 1 in moon rock. So scientists have a total headache explaining where the moon came from, because moon rock is so composition is so different, you know. So I'm not theorising about where it came from. I'm just saying that you can't easily get moon rock by going to the Arctic or something. Okay, you can't just pick it up from the Arctic, as some people seem to think. They have these isotopes, and let's just remember that once upon a time there were big international scientific conferences analysing moon rock. Okay, if it was just taken from the Arctic or somewhere, they'd have seen through that in 10 minutes. You know, they wouldn't be spending years discussing, analysing the extremely inscrutable composition of moon rock. You can take the view that that robots went to the moon and took moon rock back, but not many people believe that sort of thing. NASA just said they've got a load of the stuff they still kept that is still available to be analysed. If anyone, and so maybe that we'll hear more about in the future. let's hear a kind of that reclusive, silent fellow. Most of them are pretty reclusive and silent. Neil Armstrong at the White House. His famous words: "There are unimaginable wonders out there, but those who can remove some of truth's protective layers." What did he mean by that? So there you go. It's stuff either that he can't remember, or that he's programmed to forget, or stuff that was kind of too wonderful and strange that he couldn't express it. Whatever. But I suggest there's a challenge for the future there, to go back and there's a lot more stuff to find out. Thank you. You're going to be asked questions from the audience.
Well, do you need a neutral chairman, or can you talk without fighting each other?
I don't know. Well, who's got a question?
Right.
Yeah?
Nick, and Marcus, I guess. There's an article by Dave McGowan, Wagging the Moon Dog, which is on Wikispeaks,
Yeah.
which he goes through the logistical challenges and really looking at the argument, was it easier to fake or to do for real?
Uh-huh.
And the things that sort of jumped out for me were the fact that the Saturn V rocket, which is a huge beast, has managed to launch things to 200 miles into space, a distance of 200 miles, and yet we're expected to believe that they're going 1,200 times further with a much greater payload, particularly if you add on the moon buggy, and with all the, if you like, the vectoral variances of going that much further, and yet everything seemed to work. And I just find it implausible that they actually managed to crack all of those things, and yet we don't seem to have the capability to do it anymore. That said,
I agree, yeah.
I do believe that there is probably
And we should be
parallel
recording
technology which we are not told about, which may well be capable of doing things that we cannot imagine.
Yeah, a lot of people.
It's actually in Area 51.
Yeah, a lot of people believe that they did go to the moon.
I just find that the narrative as described implausible when you look at the logistics of what we're expected to believe.
Yeah, well, a lot of people, like, for example, the editor of Nexus believes that they did go to the moon, but not with the technology we've been shown. That they had something which I think Marcus hinted at, didn't he? He showed us this exotic secret spaceship they'd got.
X-37B.
X-37B, yeah. I think he was hinting that they might have used that or something.
It's not secret, it exists. We just don't know what it does.
Right.
It's 717 days.
Yeah, should we vote on this? Should we have a three-way vote? Well, they went to the moon with some exotic technology, not with what we've got now. They did go to the moon, or they didn't go to the moon. Is that okay?
Go for it.
Is that okay? It's a scary moment. Come on in, you do it.
This is the astronauts.
I thought we were going to ask more questions.
Yeah, okay, let's have some more questions, right. Come on, Matt, you got a question.
Well, Marcus, can you address Nick's point about when they took off and they could see the where they walked and what have you?
Yes.
Is that
yes. The LRO photographs 2009 allegedly photographed the lunar landing sites of all 6 missions that landed. Apollo 13 didn't land, Apollo 8 didn't land, Apollo 10 didn't land. 6 landed, 24 people went to the moon, 3 of them went twice.
Yeah.
Okay, Cernan, Lovell and Young.
Right.
Now, have you looked at your house on Google Maps?
Yeah.
Okay. If you had a car parked outside your front door, you could probably see which way it was pointing. If it had a sunroof in it, you could see the sunroof. I know I can on my car. There's a photograph from 450 miles above the Earth by commercial satellites in colour. The LRO pictures, we're told, is the most sophisticated piece of camera equipment ever put into space. From 10 miles above the surface, you can't see more than a blob. I don't buy it. The tracks are as wide as the lander. The lander's 20 foot wide. Were they giants? It's absolute rubbish. It's absolute nonsense that NASA never a straight
the
answer.
tracks are 20, what is it, the tracks are 20 foot wide?
The tracks are as wide as the lander. In the pictures that you showed, the lander was this little white blob, and the tracks were that wide. It doesn't make sense. Okay, what I'm pointing out is that the equipment that commercial satellite operators use can record objects on Earth through the atmosphere, the distortion, the dust, the pollution, all the rest of it, of Earth, can record something as small as a car, and the lander is the size of a pickup truck or a panel van, so twice the size.
Yeah.
You can record your own car sat outside your house. You can see if it's got a sunroof in it. You can see which way the car is pointing, and it's in colour. The LRO picture is in black and white, and they can't record enough detail from 10 miles, which is not very far for a decent camera. They can't record any detail at all. It's complete fake.
Well, I've heard it only fit in a small camera.
I've heard of Photoshop too. No, they deliberately put big cameras on LRO.
Yeah.
I've heard of Photoshop. I know what you can do with it. And if you analyse the actual picture, the Photoshop signal appears in all those LRO pictures.
Right, okay. Simon, do you have a question?
You know what, I don't have a question as such, but I can't help but think about, in that film that came out some years ago, was called What Happened on the Moon, which was a 5-year in the making film, and it covered so much detail about so many different things. Brilliant film. That's the one. About so many different things I've not seen covered in other stuff. And basically it says that Von Braun, as a child, he saw a black and white film where they called Journey to the Moon, I think, when they had the 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4 countdown, and they brought the rocket out. And he saw this and he imagined it, and then he's made his stories come about from what he saw from his fictional account, which parallels exactly. And I honestly do believe that his whole thing, space travel, completely, is just in the mind of man.
Yeah, okay. So you don't believe that we've got a future in space?
Of course not.
Do you believe that anything's gone into space?
I've seen no evidence
No.
of it whatsoever.
So no satellites or rockets?
You know what? As far as satellites go, there's some serious big problems and questions with the between 10 and 20,000 satellites that is meant to be up there in the thermosphere.
Well, there are, yeah, there are.
According to Wikipedia, between 2,500 and 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. You know, it just doesn't make sense at all. Seriously.
One point about Werner von Braun and his opposite number in the Soviet Union, as it was then, Sergei Korolev.
All right.
They both used similar equipment to design their rockets. They were called slide rules.
Yeah.
Have you ever used a slide rule?
No, I can't use one, but I know of them.
Nick, have you ever used a slide rule?
Well, they say all the computing power they had in the Apollo missions was equivalent to a modern pocket calculator.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh,
Yeah.
talking of computing equipment, the Apollo guidance system, AGC, the Apollo guidance computer, was specially designed at MIT. It was core rope memory. When they had finished with the Apollo program, do you know what they did with all their Apollo guidance computers? They stuck them in a skip and sold them for scrap. Yeah, for real. And somebody spotted them and said, hey, these are Apollo stuff, we better save them. When they'd finished with the lunar rover, they sold it for scrap metal.
They would destroy the evidence as soon as
And
possible.
none of the evidence of the telemetry, that's the transmission, or the film exists.
There's a reason for that.
It doesn't exist. It's been destroyed.
Well, I must admit that the hardest thing I find to believe, if I'm advocating that if you go to the Science Museum and you see this little pod that they supposedly came back from the moon in, and you also see the gear that they wore, you know, these aluminium suits, and nothing looks like it's got any protection from solar radiation. I mean, I'm not, neither of us mentioned this, but that is the most baffling thing, that none of the 24 astronauts, those who went out through beyond the Ballon belt, got any death from illness from cancer, didn't they? And isn't that rather odd? They could be there for several days, and what is solar radiation like? So I think we're all baffled by that.
And none of the equipment as well, all of the pressurised equipment, the spacecraft, the suits, none of it at all was ever tested in an absolute vacuum. You can't produce anything like an absolute vacuum on Earth.
No, that's true.
So what you can do if you've got something that's pressurised and you put it into an absolute vacuum, how strong does it have to be? Someone can do the math on that, surely. And it just doesn't add up at all.
There have been some interesting tests done, which are all on YouTube, you can see them about, it's not me making up stories, of people demonstrating the power of a vacuum, where they take a big tanker, railway type tanker which carries petrol or oil, big cylinder, and the cylinder is the strongest physical structure, and they start pumping the air out, which is quite easy to do, and then suddenly the whole thing goes potoi and collapses. That is the power of a vacuum with the pressure of the air on top of it. I mean, these are half-inch thick steel circles.
Right.
And
That's no way near an absolute vacuum.
Roy, did you have a question? No?
No.
Oh, sorry.
There's some points I'd like to address on your presentation.
All right, well, could we just have Alan?
Yeah, getting back to the navigation, the telemetry, being a light aircraft pilot, we have to sit an exam, and we use a thing called an E6B, which is a circular slide rule, basically.
Right.
They don't really use them these days. You use another one called a CX, that's a digital thing. And because you can't get the accuracy, well, when you're doing your exams, you're only doing flights of 200 or 300 miles. At that, to have the accuracy to get to the moon and back, and to work that out on a slide rule.
No, you don't need it. You don't need that. No. Let me explain. You've got gyroscopes in your craft.
If I could,
That's called inertial navigation.
It's quite extraordinary. I mean, I also know a bit about stellar navigation as well.
Stellar navigation, yeah, that's what we've got.
With stellar navigation, in many ways that can be easier because you haven't got the Earth revolving, and
yeah, exactly.
There are a lot of things there. But the accuracy really beggars belief with the technology that was I mean, I heard them saying they got to the moon and back and they used a navigation which was a slide rule, a 20-mile bonus zipper lighter. You know that.
They would lock onto a star, and then they would say what the direction heading was, and then Houston would do the calculation.
No, that's the story. That's the story put out. This is the whole point about the Apollo myth, or the Apollo deception. We believe what Houston say, because Houston are God. They know what they're talking about.
It's also the speed that they were travelling is
yes,
very quick. I mean, if you're travelling at 100 miles and you've got a side wing, you know, you're trying to work it out yourself. You want to get to an airport, they say, "Oh, sorry, you can't land. You've got to go somewhere else." You've got to continually modder doing that. At that speed, that's quite a lot for doing the mental arithmetic. I mean, right, these guys are good. These are the right stuff and all the other stuff. But the speeds they're hurtling through spacer, you know,
it took them about 3 days to get to the moon, didn't it?
Yes, but
3 days.
the accuracy level to hit the orbit right, and for them to line up and reconnect, that's after they've taken back up on the moon, moon again, is absolutely phenomenally skillful.
The most scary
incredibly
thing.
skillful.
but also the computers were not autonomous. They didn't have a memory. So if they were taking a star sighting, which I'm not sure that was particularly accurate, because they couldn't see stars in space, by the way.
Yeah, they couldn't look out. They did have a little
No, they
bubble
couldn't.
canopy.
Come on.
No, suddenly you can see stars when they're convenient, but when you can't see them, you know, when it's not convenient, you can't see them.
You can't see them on the lunar surface.
They can see them on the backside of the moon, apparently.
Yes, of course you can. Of course you can. Now, there's a recent book about the Apollo. It's called the Apollo Moon Landing Hoax. The Apollo Moon Landings: Hiding a Hoax in Plain Sight. And it's written by a pilot who was interested in the subject when he heard about the navigation system going to the moon and back. He said, "I have trouble piloting an aircraft a couple of 100 miles when I have a radio beacon at one end, and I've got maps, and I've got radar, and I've got all the modern equipment." These guys, 50 years ago, were navigating through space, millions of square miles of space, using a computer that had no memory, aiming for a target that was moving. You've come from place that is moving as well,
that they couldn't see.
which they couldn't see because they were in barbecue mode, which is nonsense because when you see the film of the Earth from the craft, it doesn't move. So they're not in barbecue mode. Anyway, barbecue mode would just cook them just that bit slower.
It's all Newtonian science that the calculations they had to do.
They're not really moving, are they? If you've got the Earth here and the moon there, and they're both moving through space,
No.
they're not really particularly moving.
The moon is moving in relation to the Earth.
Yeah, but not
Yes, it does.
particularly
It
fast.
takes 29 days for the moon to orbit the
So
Earth.
that's not particularly fast.
So, no, but if you're setting off from Earth to hit the moon in 3 days' time, how far ahead of the moon do you have to aim?
Well,
to
it's just a
arrive at that
calculation.
time?
It's just a physics calculation.
But they didn't
As
have
far
a,
as I'm
they didn't have a
concerned,
computer,
I can
they had a
say
memory.
These
They
were
didn't need one.
phenomenal
Most of them
navigators and extraordinary good photographers.
Who's just radio to them instructions?
Okay.
And they had to trust them. I mean,
Can
for
I-
me, the scariest thing would have been in the lunar journey, that deceleration, when they're coming to the moon or even going back to Earth, you fire the retro rockets to decelerate to get into lunar orbit. And if you get that slightly wrong, you bounce off and you go into deep space and you don't get another shot. That's it.
Yes.
And ditto for coming back to Earth. You've got to hit the Earth's atmosphere at just the right rate that you start burning up, you start heating up, and you don't glance off
Right,
into deep space.
what's the angle they have to hit the Earth at?
Well, I don't know, but
6.5 degrees.
6.5 degrees of what?
6.5 degrees to the Earth's surface. So they're
Okay.
coming in at a very shallow angle. How do they know they got the angle right? Because
Well,
there
they
are
have
no,
to trust
break,
who tells them.
there are
The whole
no
thing
brakes
is-
on a spacecraft. They can't alter their orbit. Because they, and this idea of slowing down on the moon, no, they didn't slow down
They
on
had
the moon.
retro rockets to
The
slow
moon,
down.
when they got to, there's a point between the Earth and the moon where the gravity of both equal out. It's about 20,000 miles from the moon's surface. They leave Earth at 25,000 miles an hour. The time the rocket switches off, they're slowing down all the way to the moon. The gravity's pulling them back.
Is anyone an engineer or a mechanic can answer this?
Yeah, I'm telling you. When they get to the equigravitational point, which is 20,000 miles from the moon's surface, they start accelerating from the moon's gravity.
Ah, right.
They then have to slow down by firing the retro rocket
Yeah,
to go into orbit.
yeah. Okay. Well, Stephen, you're an engineer. Is that? Do you agree with what Marcus said?
Yeah.
You did. Sorry, got there. You see, agrees with you, right?
None of it's true.
What?
Marcus, how do you explain what Nick said about the Chinese landings, about the photographs being very similar to the Apollo landing? What's your response to that?
I don't agree that they're very similar.
You don't agree?
No,
Okay.
I don't agree that they're very similar. Because they're using digital cameras as well, don't forget.
Uh-huh.
This is the difference. This is why I emphasise the point about photographic film being different from digital. Digital film can record levels of light on the same CCD or on the same pixel very differently from the emulsion of a photographic film.
Right.
You
So-
have to get the exposure right.
So do you accept that, are those Chinese photographs genuine in your opinion?
I would say that I see no reason to believe that they're not genuine. But also don't forget that China and India are beholden to NASA
Yeah.
for quite a lot of what's going on. They're not going to upset NASA.
Right.
In the same way, the Russians didn't blow the whistle on NASA. When NASA said, "We've landed on the moon," Russia said, "Well done, guys." They didn't say, "What a load of rubbish." What's happening now is very different. The Soviet Union is finished. The Russian Federation exists. There are still Russian rocket scientists. Guess whose rocket engines are used to launch all American rockets now? Russians.
Russians, yeah.
Who are the people who take the American astronauts to the space station? Assuming it's there. Russian. $70 million a seat.
So, Simon, is it really there at the space station?
Of course it's not.
Well, okay.
Fictional, sorry.
And they're in Star City in Moscow, it looks like, hanging around when it's where everyone goes when they're meant to be elsewhere, so no one sees
It's
them.
amazing what you can do with green screen these days, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, that's another story.
So Marx's very recent position is that unmanned craft has gone to the moon, and human have orbited the Earth. Which, I think that's a very, very sensible.
Yeah, that's a fair summary.
Yeah.
Well, actually, can I just make one point about the
Please do,
retro
yeah.
reflectors? Because that is always brought up as this incredible evidence for man having put them there.
Oh, right.
Because they've got footprints around. Those retro reflectors are about 18 inches square. Not very big. About half the size of this table. The laser fired from Earth, yes, you can fire a laser from Earth that reaches the moon, spreads out. It's about 2 kilometres wide, as I said earlier. 2 kilometres wide. What percentage of the light that hits that reflector is reflected back to Earth? There's 38 million square metres in a 2 kilometre diameter circle. It's 0.0007%. Very little. It's only on the moon now, it's got to get back to Earth. What diameter will that same laser beam be when it gets back to Earth? 20 kilometres wide. What percentage of that square metre of light will get back to Earth? None. The point is, as I mentioned earlier, in 1962, Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the Astrophysical Laboratory in Crimea were doing exactly that, firing lasers at the moon and getting a signal back. They're bloody great dishes. 6 photons, I think, was the figure. So 7 years before any astronaut got to the moon, this firing lasers at the moon and getting a signal back was being done. You don't need anything on the moon. It's absolute.
It's a red herring, isn't it?
What?
It's a red herring.
Yeah, it's science fiction.
Yeah.
As most of it is.
This is a much less technical question.
Go on.
There was a citizen journalist that I saw on YouTube, and he went up to several astronauts, and he just wanted them to swear on the Holy Bible, which is quite a simple task. You just swear on the Holy Bible that you did actually land on the moon, and he had a negative response from everybody.
That was Bart Sabrell.
Is it? Yeah.
In
In fact, someone actually punched him, didn't they?
Astronauts Gone Wild was the film. Because he had the temerity to have a Bible in one hand and a microphone in the other and said, would you please swear on this Bible that you walked on the lunar surface?
I thought one of them did. I thought one of them agreed to it.
The 3 of them agreed to.
They agreed to it?
Yes, 3 of them agreed to.
They did.
But Buzz Aldrin whacked him. And
But he did call him a coward. It was very insulting.
Yes, and Bart Sabrell has subsequently apologised. He said, I shouldn't have been so aggressive with an 80-year-old.
Yeah, quite right too. Yeah.
I'd be aggressive, you know. But no, it was, and also Neil Armstrong was asked that question, and he flatly refused. He was even offered $5,000 in cash for a charity of his choice.
Fantastic, yeah.
And he still refused. Now, you could say Armstrong is an honourable man and couldn't go against his Christian beliefs, that he would not swear to something on a Bible that he hadn't done.
Wow.
Al Bean was the guy who said he didn't think the Van Allen belts that they'd gone far enough out to meet them. This is an astronaut going to the moon, allegedly. He doesn't know where the Van Allen radiation belts are. They're 1,000 miles up. Then he was told they were 1,000 miles up. He said, we must have gone through them, but we didn't notice anything.
Astronaut, and the emphasis on the word naut, isn't it? On the naut part.
So there's some right.
It's time for the vote. Marcus.
Bean did become a hang on, there's a couple of points I must bring up. Oh, okay. The wrong shadows. That picture you showed, Apollo 14. The lander, the shadows going one way, a few rocks on the front. That's a model. That's set. And it was illuminated by quite a large floodlight. And you can demonstrate that it was a model. As was the jump salute. It was a model suspended, because there are 2 pictures, and the model itself is identical in both pictures, but in different positions.
There are some wires visible on some of the jumps.
Yeah, you can see them. And also, because many of the shots of the lunar rover are radio controlled models, because, and the reason we know that is because the astronaut sat in the lunar rover, allegedly steering it round corners, bouncing up and down, is in exactly the same position no matter what's happening. He sat like this. He's not moving. He's not doing anything. His hands aren't moving. It's a model. And that is a well-known technique in the film business where they use models. I haven't mentioned who I consider was the genius behind all this, because there are 5 different speeds of the film. There are 5 different frame sizes.
Well, let me guess. Stanley Kubrick.
I said it wasn't Stanley Kubrick. Weren't you paying attention?
Oh,
I said it's nothing to do with Stanley Kubrick. It's a red herring.
It's not. Oh, right. Okay.
It's also a film made by a French film director, isn't it? Where
Well, come on. Hey, look. Let's have a vote before he leaves. I'll just let everybody who's here.
Okay.
Is that right, Marcus?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Okay. Hands up. How many do believe? Marcus was first. That nobody has been to the moon. Can we count this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Right. Hands up who believes what I said, that the Apollo astronauts did go to the moon. 3. Can someone write this down? 11 to 3. 11 to 3. And is there anyone who believes what I say, maybe Nexus type position, that they did go to the moon, but with other technology, not with the rockets we have now?
There's a different program.
1, 2, 3.
3.
Yeah.
Okay.
3, 11,
I have a note.
yeah.
I have a note.
3 is the magic number.
3 is a good number.
Okay.
Sorry to fail.
Yeah.
Okay.
See you later.
Yeah.
Just one totally different situation. Talking of numbers, if you see the sequence of numbers 4, 10, 20, do you know what that means?
No.
4, 10, 20. DJT. Who is DJT? The President of the United States.
Trump.
What?
DJT.
Oh, Trump.
4,
Well,
10,
I remember a year ago, when I was talking to Marcus about doing this, and he said, yeah, you would be better do a debate, and he said, and I will win. So there you go.
Trump.
Yeah.
Trump. I say,
Okay, let's do that.
Thank you. Thank you. It's generous.
Right, thanks, Marcus.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Nick.
yeah.
A worthy opponent. 30 years association. 30 years. Where's the microphone? 30 years association.